Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome back to our series for this Ramadan 2025, and our 11th year of the Ramadan Reflections. This year our theme being the soul's path home, divine wisdom on death and beyond, where we continue our journey through the stages of human existence and life and death from the perspective of the Quran and the teachings of the Ahlul Bayt, as is further elaborated by our respected scholars of this faith. Today in this episode, we focus on the emotional aspect of death, specifically how it affects the loved ones left behind. We're going to reflect on the profound sorrow that arises when we lose someone dear to us, and explore how, as believers, we can cope with grief in a way that aligns with our faith. And we will touch upon this at the end of the series as well in the last few days in more detail. Now, let me just mention that death is a universal experience, and although it is inevitable for every soul, it still catches us off guard when it strikes those that we love. Even if we know that person has a terminal illness and they will never recover from it, when death comes to them, our hearts feel heavy and our minds are filled with questions. How do we cope with the absence of a loved one? How do we deal with the pain of loss and separation? Well, the answer to this is not far. It's not some form of yoga or meditation that we have to involve ourselves in. It's not found in some secret book that's hidden. Rather, the answer is right in front of us, brothers and sisters. You know, in the Quran, this beautiful book that we should be studying every day in this month of Ramadan, Allah prepares us for these moments of hardship. For example, in chapter number 3, Surah Al-Imran, Allah reminds us of the trials we will face in life, including the testing of our emotions and our attachments. And so, for example, in verse 186 of chapter number 3, Allah says, "You will surely be tested in your wealth and your lives." This portion of the verse shows us that we are being reminded that death, as painful as it is part of the test that we must endure in this world. It challenges our patience, our faith, and our resilience. In fact, let me go even deeper than this into one of the most important passages of the Noble Quran that all of us must read, memorize, study, understand, and internalize, and live in our lives. And this is found in Surah Al-Baqarah chapter 2, verses 155 to 157, in which Allah tells us, "We will certainly test you as something of fear and hunger, and loss of wealth and lives and fruits. But give glad tidings to the persevering and patient. Those who, when a disaster befalls them, say, 'Surely we belong to Allah, and surely to Him we are bound to return.' Such are those upon whom are blessings from their Lord and mercy, and they are the rightly guided ones." SubhanAllah, a beautiful passage that all of us should memorize and read and reflect upon every day. These verses, as I said, from Surah Al-Baqarah, chapter 2 of the Quran, offer profound guidance on processing death and hardships and challenges in our lives. These 3 verses, brothers and sisters, provide a spiritual framework for understanding and coping with life's challenges, including the loss of a loved one or a friend or a community member. It all begins with Allah reminding us of the nature of life's tests. Verse 155 reminds us that life inherently involves trials. These tests come in various forms, and each person will not necessarily have to deal with all of them. Maybe only one of them, or 2, or 3, or more. The first test is fear. Look at the world around us today with the wars. Not only are the people in the war zone living a life of fear, but even us that are thousands of kilometers or miles away, we are gripped with fear of the unknown. Number 2 is hunger. How many people go to bed hungry, especially children, every day around the world, and even in our home countries here in the so-called developed West? Number 3 is a loss of wealth. Stock markets go up and down. Inflation plagues every country, more or less. Our buying power is always fluctuating, and many people, even in the so-called developed world, are on the brink of financial ruin and bankruptcy. Number 4, a loss of lives. We see and maybe experience this regularly around us, losing our family, our friends, and our community members. Number 5, a decrease in our fruits or our earnings. With job cuts and some jobs being taken over by machines and AI, there is a real fear out there today that people are going to be out of work. This verse, brothers and sisters, beautifully acknowledges the reality of suffering, but also offers hope by promising glad tidings to those who persevere. It encourages us to view hardships not as punishments, but as opportunities for spiritual growth and to strengthen our faith. So what should the believer's response be in such times? Well, verse 156 teaches us the ideal response when facing calamities, including death. Surely we belong to Allah, and surely to Him we are bound to return. Now, this profound statement, known as the Kalimatul Istirja, serves multiple purposes. Number 1, it reminds us of our origin and our ultimate destination, putting this earthly existence into perspective. Number 2, it acknowledges Allah's ownership over everything, including our lives and those of our loved ones. Number 3, it helps us accept the transient nature of this world and the inevitability of return to our Creator. So in essence, by internalizing this concept, we can find solace in knowing that death is not an end, but rather a source, or rather a return to our source. However, it's not just enough to say this phrase, Inna Lillahi wa Inna Ilayhi Rajioon, or in today's day and age, simply to send it as a text message or a WhatsApp message as we normally do when somebody dies. Now, there's no problem in that. However, more than just typing or copying and pasting it into a message, we need to live and internalize the verse of the Quran. What is the outcome that the Quran promises? Well, simply put, the rewards of the patient are something that are literally out of this world. And verse 157 outlines the divine rewards for those who respond to trials with patience and the recognition of Allah's sovereignty. And we see 3 important things in this verse. Number 1 is blessings from their Lord. Number 2 is mercy from their Lord. And number 3 is guidance from their Lord. These rewards encompass both this world and the hereafter, offering comfort and support in times of grief and reassurance of a greater purpose behind all of the trials that you and I will have to inevitably go through. However, before we can move on, let me offer you some practical applications of these 3 verses when it comes to processing the death of somebody. How should our hearts and minds react? Well, the first point is to acknowledge the pain. Allow yourself to grieve. Recognize that feeling sorrow is natural and human. There's nothing wrong with this, really. And I'm going to talk more about grief near the end of this month of Ramadan. But keep in the forefront of your mind that it is normal to grieve and cry. Number 2 is to reflect on the temporary nature of this world. Use this phrase, Inna Lillahi wa Inna Ilayhi Rajioon, as a meditation piece to remind yourself of life's transient nature and our ultimate return to Allah. The third point I want to emphasize this afternoon, this morning, this evening, whenever you're watching or listening, is to seek patience. We must daily be actively working on developing patience, knowing it's a virtue that brings divine blessings and mercy. My fourth point to you today is that we must seek and find meaning in trials and tribulation. Try to view hardships as opportunities for spiritual growth and closeness to Allah. And don't think of what has happened as being something negative and question, why is Allah testing me? Why? No. Rather, we should flip the narrative, flip the script, and rather than saying, why me? We must get into a habit of saying, why not me? The fifth point is that we must continuously practice gratitude, shukr, thanks to God. Even in times of loss, we can easily find things to be thankful for. And this can help shift perspective and bring comfort to our heart. Now, my sixth and final point, as we can then move on to another part of our discussion for today, is to support others. We must reach out to those who are grieving, offer them comfort and practical help, as this can also aid in our own personal healing process. Now, by internalizing these verses that we've looked at today from chapter number 2, Surah Al-Baqarah, and applying their wisdom, we can develop a more resilient and spiritually grounded approach to dealing with death and other life challenges. Before we conclude, let's go back to the theme and reflect on the pain of loss and that human experience. Look, when we lose a loved one, whether a parent, a child, a spouse, a dear friend, the emotional weight can be overwhelming at times. The Quran acknowledges the pain of losing someone we care about. But it also teaches us that this emotional struggle is not in vain. Rather, it's a means of growth, a chance to reflect on our own lives and the transient nature of the life of this world. We really have to realize, brothers and sisters, that everything in our lives, including the people that we so dearly love, are ultimately in the hands of Allah. While we may feel that sharp sting of a loss, we have to remember that death is in accordance with divine wisdom. This perspective doesn't negate the pain, but it helps understand the transient nature of life, as I've said. For a believer, one of the most powerful ways to cope with loss is through prayer and the remembrance of Allah. The Quran encourages us to seek solace in the worship of Allah, as He is the ultimate source of peace and comfort. After all, Allah says in chapter 13, verse 28, "Indeed, in the remembrance of Allah do hearts find rest." Now, this verse, which some people incorrectly translate and use and misuse and give to others, does not mean that we simply read this verse 100, 1,000, or 10,000 times and all will be good. No, it's not that easy. Really, it's not that easy. When we experience loss, our hearts feel heavy and restless. But turning to Allah through prayer, through supplication and remembrance can ease the pain. That's what's meant by engaging the dhikr of Allah. It doesn't mean you just recite this one verse 100 or 1,000 or 10,000 times. The family and friends of the deceased are encouraged to pray for the departed soul, as their supplications benefit the deceased in the hereafter and also benefit us by giving us comfort and solace that they are, hopefully, if they lived a righteous life, in a much better place. So how can we cope with loss? Well, in times of grief, as we have been constantly saying, and we need to repeat again, it's essential to remember that death is a natural part of Allah's plan for humanity. Every soul is destined to return to Allah. While the pain of separation is real and inevitable, the Quran encourages us to view death not just as an end, but as I've been saying, a transition to the eternal realm. For the believer, death is a return to Allah, where they will be rewarded for their deeds. Now, this divine perspective helps us understand that the separation is temporary, and the soul will ultimately be reunited with Allah in peace. Yes, for a brief instant, it may be that leaving this world will feel like the believer that is parting from this world is losing something, no doubt. However, that thought will very quickly change into the believer's true understanding, which is that they will begin to look forward to the rewards that await them in the hereafter. As we reflect on the impact of death on those who remain behind, let us remember that our trials in this world are temporary, and the rewards of patience and faith are eternal. May Allah grant us the strength to endure loss with grace, and may He reward us and our loved ones with peace in this life and the hereafter. In our next episode, we'll continue our journey through the stages of death and reflect on the final journey, part 1 of 2 of the funeral and the burial process. Until then, may Allah grant us, all of us, patience and serenity in times of loss. May Allah comfort us in times of grief and sorrow. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.